I signed the divorce papers with a smile, the kind that hides 1,000 unshed tears. The lawyer slid the documents across the polished oak desk, and my pen trembled for just a moment before meeting the page. I looked at Marcus, my husband of 25 years, sitting across from me. His tie was straight, his jaw tight, his eyes colder than the first winter we'd ever spent together. He didn't notice what I'd added. He didn't even look long enough to care. The moment the pen left the paper, I felt something inside me unclench. Not freedom, not yet, but the slow breaking of a chain that had been wrapped around my heart for decades. "Congratulations," the lawyer said dryly, as if this was some kind of achievement. Marcus stood, buttoned his jacket, and said, "I'll send someone for the rest of my things." That was it. No goodbye, no glance back. 25 years, gone in less than a minute. When the door closed, I stayed still. The silence was heavier than any words he could have said. I reached into my purse and touched the small, folded letter I'd slipped between the pages of the divorce agreement, the one he hadn't seen. It wasn't revenge, it was closure. My last words to him, the truth he'd never had the courage to face. That night, I went home to an empty house that smelled of lemon cleaner and loneliness. The kitchen was spotless, but every corner carried a memory. His laugh, his shoes by the door, the sound of him humming when he shaved. I poured myself a glass of wine, turned off all the lights, and whispered, "Here's to endings, and to whatever comes next." Before Marcus became a man I had to divorce, he was the man I thought God himself sent to heal me. We met in the summer of 1993 at a church fundraiser in Atlanta. I was 24, wearing a white dress I'd sewn myself, the kind my mother said made me look too hopeful. Marcus was behind the grill, laughing with his friends, the smoke curling around his smile like some kind of halo. He said my name, Clara, like he'd known it all his life. And just like that, I believed him. We married 2 years later. I thought love meant sacrifice, so I gave and gave until there wasn't much left of me. He built his business, I built our home. I stayed up late balancing bills, making sure the lights stayed on, cooking dinner he often came home too late to eat. When our son Daniel was born, I thought things would change. They did, but not the way I'd hoped. Marcus grew quieter, colder. The man who once brought me roses started bringing excuses. Late nights became business trips, and when he did come home, his eyes were somewhere else. Still, I held on, because that's what women like me were taught to do. Hold on, even when your hands start bleeding. I remember one evening, standing in front of the mirror, fixing my hair before church. He walked past me and said, "You don't have to try so hard, Clara. Nobody's looking." That was the night something small inside me cracked. Not enough to leave, just enough to notice how empty our home had become. By the time Daniel left for college, Marcus had already moved into the guest room. We were still married, but only on paper, a quiet performance for the world, 2 actors pretending we hadn't forgotten our lines. And yet, I didn't see the betrayal coming. Maybe I didn't want to. It started with a phone call, a woman's voice, soft, nervous, asking for him. When I asked who was calling, she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were out of town together." My hands went cold. That was the night the storm began. The storm didn't arrive with thunder, it came quietly, in the form of silence that filled the spaces Marcus once occupied, the kind of silence that hums in your ears and settles deep inside your bones. After that phone call, I didn't sleep for 3 nights. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow circles above me, trying to convince myself it was a misunderstanding. But women like me, we always know before we admit it. My mother used to say, "A woman's heart hears the truth before her ears ever do." So I started listening, to the whispers behind closed doors, to the sudden need for late meetings, to the way his phone turned face down every time it buzzed. One night, after Marcus left for another conference, I opened his laptop. My hands shook so badly I could barely type his password, but the devil must have guided me because it worked on the first try. The messages were there, hundreds of them. Her name was Vanessa, younger, confident, the kind of woman who posted pictures of herself sipping wine on rooftops, writing captions like, "New beginnings are the sweetest." They'd been together for a year, a whole year, and I'd been cooking his favorite meals, ironing his shirts, praying for our marriage to heal. There's a particular kind of pain that doesn't make you cry right away. It freezes you first, like the world stops spinning and you're stuck in a room full of ghosts. I remember sitting on the couch, reading every message until the sun started to rise. The last one read, "I'll tell her after the holidays. She deserves to enjoy Christmas." I laughed, a hollow, broken laugh that scared even me. That morning, I looked around the house I'd built, the photos, the curtains, the scent of lavender polish on the furniture, and realized it wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the version of me who believed in forever. When he came home 2 days later, I didn't scream or cry. I made him coffee, asked how his trip went. I even smiled when he lied straight to my face. Because I needed time, not revenge, not drama, just time to decide who I wanted to be when I stopped being his wife. But then, fate took care of what I couldn't. 2 weeks later, I was at a grocery store when I saw them together. He didn't see me. They were in the produce aisle, laughing like teenagers, her hand resting on his arm the way mine used to. And for the first time, instead of pain, I felt pity. That was the moment something shifted. The love that had once filled my life turned into clarity. I went home, took down our wedding photo, and set it on the table. I stared at it for a long time, the young couple, smiling, full of promises, and then the frame slipped from my hands and shattered. I didn't pick it up. I let it stay there, pieces scattered across the floor, because that was exactly what our life had become, a picture too broken to fix. That night, I wrote a letter, not to him, but to myself. It began, "Dear Clara, you have spent too many years trying to be enough for someone who never deserved all of you. Tomorrow, you will stop surviving and start living." And the next day, I did. The first morning after Marcus left for good, the house felt like an empty shell. No scent of his razor humming in the bathroom, no scent of his cologne hanging in the air, just silence, thick, heavy, and strangely peaceful. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers he'd finally signed. The ink was barely dry. Next to it lay my wedding ring, the one he couldn't even look at when he handed it back. For a long time, I thought that little circle of gold defined me. But now, without it, I felt lighter, freer. The first thing I did was open the windows. The cold February air rushed in, biting my skin but waking me up inside. Then I turned on some music, not the jazz Marcus liked, but my music, old school soul, the kind that speaks to broken hearts and stubborn hope. As Aretha Franklin sang "Ain't No Way," I started cleaning. Not just dust and dishes, memories. I threw out the shirts he left behind, donated the ties, boxed up the framed photos, and filled a whole bag with the letters we once wrote each other. It hurt. God, it hurt. But pain was a kind of cleansing, too. Every tear that felt like washing off another layer of his control. When I was done, the sun had risen high enough to light the kitchen in soft gold. For the first time in years, I looked around and saw my home, not our home. Then came the harder part, the outside world. Everyone in town knew us. The Carters, married 30 years, solid as oak. The whispers started before the ink even dried on the papers. At church, Sister Marlene hugged me too long, whispering, "You're so strong, Clara." At the grocery store, folks gave me that pity smile, the kind that says, "We heard." At first, I wanted to hide. But something inside me, maybe the same fire that kept me working double shifts back when the kids were small, refused. So I did something that terrified me. I applied for a job. It had been nearly 2 decades since I'd last worked. Marcus always said, "You don't need to work, baby. I got us." But now, "I got us" didn't mean a damn thing. The local library posted an opening for an assistant. It wasn't glamorous, but books had always been my safe place. I put on my best blouse, borrowed confidence from somewhere deep inside, and went to the interview. When the young woman behind the desk asked, "Mrs. Carter, what made you decide to come back to work?" I smiled and said, "Because I forgot how strong I was, and I'd like to remember." I got the job. The first day I held that ID badge with Clara Carter, library assistant, printed on it, I almost cried. It wasn't just a name tag. It was proof that I still existed, that my story wasn't over because my marriage was. Every day after that, life became a little more mine. Coffee in the morning sunlight, books stacked high on the desk, laughter shared with coworkers who didn't know my past, only the woman in front of them. And every evening, when I came home to my quiet house, I didn't feel lonely anymore. I felt peaceful. Because I finally realized sometimes losing someone isn't the end of your story. It's just the beginning of you. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of quiet, ordinary day that fools you into thinking nothing will ever change again. I was shelving returned books in the fiction section when I heard a man's voice behind me. "Clara? Clara Henderson? Is that really you?" For a second, I froze. Henderson. That was my maiden name, a name I hadn't heard in over 30 years. I turned around, and there he was. Tall, salt and pepper hair, same warm brown eyes that once looked at me across a high school cafeteria table. "Raymond Davis," I whispered before I could stop myself. He grinned, a little shy, a little older. "You remember." How could I forget? Raymond was my first love, the boy who used to walk me home after choir practice, the one who promised he'd marry me before life pulled us in different directions. He went off to the army, and I married Marcus. And now, here he was, standing in front of me in the quiet of the library, 32 years later. He told me he'd moved back to town after retiring, lost his wife to cancer 5 years ago. "It's strange," he said softly, "how life circles back when you least expect it." We talked for an hour, about everything and nothing, about how the town had changed, how the diner still served the best peach cobbler, how his mother used to sneak us sandwiches when we studied late. For the first time in months, I laughed, really laughed. That evening, as I walked home, my reflection in the shop windows looked different. The same lines, the same gray streaks in my hair, but my eyes, they looked alive. Raymond started coming to the library more often after that. Sometimes with an excuse, "I need a new mystery novel," sometimes with none at all. We'd sit in the reading corner, sipping coffee, talking about music, faith, and all the things we wished we'd done differently. One afternoon, he said something that stopped me cold. "You always were strong, Clara, even back then. You just didn't see it." That night, I sat in my quiet kitchen again, but instead of tears, there was a strange warmth spreading through me. Not romance, not yet, just recognition. Someone saw me again, the real me. Still, I wasn't ready. When Raymond gently asked if I'd join him for dinner one weekend, I told him, maybe another time. He smiled, not disappointed, just patient. "I'll wait," he said softly. "You've earned the right to move at your own pace." It was kindness like that, simple, quiet, that began to heal the wounds I thought would never close. But healing doesn't mean forgetting. Some nights I'd wake up from dreams of my old house, of Marcus's angry voice, of the woman I used to be, the one who always apologized. One evening, as I closed the library, I found a note on my desk. It was from Raymond. "Clara, you remind me that life doesn't end with loss. Sometimes it begins there. R." I pressed that note to my chest and whispered a small prayer of thanks. Maybe God was telling me something. Maybe the universe, or whatever force had carried me this far, was saying, "You're not done yet." Because life, as I was learning, doesn't wait for your permission to surprise you. 2 months after seeing Raymond again, I decided to clean the attic. Not because it needed cleaning, but because I needed peace. The attic had been closed for years, filled with boxes of my old life, wedding photos, Marcus's old clothes, things too heavy to touch before. But that morning, I felt ready. Maybe it was Raymond's words echoing in my mind. "You always were strong, Clara." Dust floated like ghosts in the sunlight as I opened the boxes one by one. Old Christmas ornaments, a faded baby blanket, a chipped porcelain angel my mother gave me before she passed. Then, tucked inside a stack of yellowed letters, I found one envelope that didn't look like the others. It was addressed to me, Mrs. Clara Lewis, in Marcus's handwriting. But it wasn't sealed, and the date written on it was 2 weeks before our divorce. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. "Clara, if you're reading this, I probably didn't have the courage to say it to your face. I know what I've done can't be undone. You didn't deserve the way I treated you. You deserved peace. I hope one day you find it, even if it's not with me." There was a line scratched out beneath it, but I could still make out the words, "I never stopped loving you." For a moment, I just sat there, numb. Tears came, not from sadness this time, but from the strange realization that the man who had broken me was also a man drowning in his own pain. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained something I'd never allowed myself to see. Marcus wasn't a monster. He was a broken man who didn't know how to love right. And for the first time, I felt free, truly free. That night, I took the letter outside and burned it under the stars. The flame flickered softly, like a heartbeat fading into peace. As the last bit of paper turned to ash, I whispered, "I forgive you, Marcus. But I forgive myself more, for staying too long, for losing myself, for being afraid." The next morning, I woke up lighter. I played jazz records while cooking breakfast, opened the windows wide, and let the sunlight spill across my kitchen table. Later that week, I saw Raymond again. He noticed it right away, the calm in my voice, the softness in my eyes. "What changed?" he asked gently. "I let go," I said simply, "of him, of everything." He smiled, that slow, knowing smile that reached his eyes. "I'm proud of you, Clara." Something inside me stirred then, not love, not yet, but the quiet realization that maybe, just maybe, I could trust again. That evening, I wrote in my journal, "Healing isn't forgetting the past, it's learning to live with it and still choosing joy." As I closed the journal, I heard my own voice in my mind, strong, steady, alive. "You're doing it, Clara. You're living again." And for the first time, I believed it. The day I decided to leave Atlanta, it wasn't out of sadness, it was out of clarity. I stood by the window with a cup of tea in my hand, watching the golden light spread across the street where I had lived for more than 30 years. That house had seen everything: laughter, betrayal, silence, and the slow rebirth of my soul. But now it felt too full of memories, too crowded with ghosts. So, one morning, I packed my life into 3 boxes and a suitcase. I left the rest, the furniture, the dishes, the wedding china Marcus had insisted we keep, for someone else to fill with new memories. I sold the house, I bought a used blue car that smelled faintly of lavender, and I drove. The highway stretched before me like a promise. I turned the radio up, the warm rhythm of old Motown filling the car, and I sang, not beautifully, but freely. I hadn't felt that kind of freedom since my 20s. After 6 hours on the road, I reached Savannah, Georgia, a city with moss-draped oaks and whispers of the past in every cobblestone street. The air smelled of salt and jasmine, and when I saw the ocean, something inside me loosened. I rented a small cottage near the waterfront, white shutters, a porch swing, and wild roses crawling along the fence. The first night there, I sat outside with a glass of sweet tea, listening to the hum of crickets and the soft roll of the tide. For the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. It healed. The next morning, I walked through the local market. The people were friendly. A man selling peaches called me Miss Sunshine, and a woman at the bakery handed me a warm biscuit just because I looked like someone who needed something sweet. I smiled so much my cheeks ached. Then, at a small art booth by the pier, I saw him, Raymond. He stood there, holding a sketchbook, his back turned toward me. Raymond? He turned, surprised, and then he laughed. Clara, you here too? We stood there, two souls who'd escaped their own storms, now meeting under blue skies. He explained he'd been visiting Savannah for a photography project, capturing stories of people starting over. How fitting, I said with a grin. You found your perfect subject. Over the next few weeks, we became companions. Not lovers, not yet, but two people walking side by side through a quieter life. We visited art shows, went on long evening walks, and sometimes just sat in silence by the sea. One night, he asked me, "Do you ever think about what you added to those divorce papers?" I smiled. Every day. He laughed softly. And what was it, really? I met his eyes. A promise to never lose myself again. Months passed. I began volunteering at a community center, teaching women how to budget, build credit, and rebuild their lives after divorce or loss. Watching their eyes light up with hope, that became my purpose. Sometimes I told them parts of my story, never with bitterness, always with truth. Pain doesn't define you, I'd tell them, but how you rise after it. One evening, as the sun set over the marshes, I wrote in my journal, "Life didn't give me what I wanted, but it gave me what I needed: strength, peace, and the power to begin again." I closed my notebook and watched the horizon glow pink and gold. For the first time, I realized the story I'd been living wasn't about Marcus or betrayal or loss. It was about becoming Clara. Savannah taught me to breathe again. The mornings there were slow, sunlight slipping through lace curtains, the smell of fresh coffee, and the gentle rhythm of waves in the distance. It was the kind of peace I used to envy in others, the kind that once felt unreachable for a woman like me. But peace doesn't come all at once. It creeps in softly, like dawn after a long night. One morning, while walking along the pier, I saw a young woman sitting on the bench, her face hidden behind trembling hands. Something in her posture, that quiet collapse, pulled me toward her. "Sweetheart," I said gently, sitting beside her, "you look like you've been holding your breath for too long." She looked up, eyes red, voice shaky. "My husband left, said he needed someone younger. I don't even know who I am anymore." Her pain was raw, familiar. I could almost feel my past echoing in her words. I smiled softly. "You're not what he left. You're what you're becoming." She frowned a little, confused. I continued, "He left because he couldn't see your worth. That's not your fault. That's his blindness. You'll find yourself again. You just have to keep walking forward, even when your knees tremble." That day, I realized something. My story wasn't just for me anymore. It was for every woman who'd ever been told she was too old, too used, too broken to start again. I started a small support group at the community center called The Second Sunrise. 10 women came the first week, 30 by the third. We sat in a circle of mismatched chairs, telling our stories about loss, betrayal, survival. There were tears, yes, but also laughter, real freeing laughter. We celebrated small victories, someone finding a new job, another finally sleeping through the night, one woman walking into court and saying, "I'm done being afraid." They called me Miss Clara, and sometimes Mama C. I didn't mind. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was right where I was meant to be. One evening, Raymond showed up at one of our sessions with his camera. "Thought I'd capture this magic you've built," he said. He spent hours taking photos, not of sadness, but of resilience. Women smiling through tears, hands clasped, eyes glowing with newfound strength. When he showed me the photos, I felt my throat tighten. "You didn't just take pictures," I whispered. "You caught light." Raymond looked at me, his expression warm. "No, Clara, you brought it back." As months turned into a year, my cottage became a gathering place. On weekends, I cooked gumbo and cornbread, filling the air with the smell of home and healing. Laughter spilled from the porch, mixing with the hum of cicadas. Sometimes, when the night grew quiet, Raymond stayed behind after everyone had gone. We'd sit side by side, watching the stars. "You ever think about love again?" he asked once, his voice barely above the whisper of the waves. I thought for a long time before answering. "I think about it differently now," I said. "Not as something that completes me, but something that adds to what I've already built." He nodded slowly, eyes soft. "Then maybe, one day, we'll add something beautiful together." And for the first time in years, I didn't flinch at the thought. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something extraordinary. I wasn't waiting for happiness to find me anymore. I had built it, piece by piece, with my own two hands. Some scars don't fade, but they don't have to. They remind us we survived. Savannah had changed me, not just the town, but the rhythm of life itself. I woke up with the sunrise now, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The ocean sang me awake each morning, and I found joy in the small things. The scent of jasmine drifting through my open window, the sound of laughter from the neighbor's porch, the way the light touched everything golden. I used to think healing meant forgetting, but I learned it means remembering without breaking. One Saturday afternoon, Raymond came by with his usual grin and a bunch of sunflowers in his hands. "These look like you," he said. I laughed. "Old and bright?" He chuckled. "Strong and facing the sun no matter what." We spent the afternoon painting the porch together. I watched him move, careful, patient, and realized how gentle love could be when it wasn't trying to fix or control you. He wasn't like Marcus. He didn't need to own my smile. He just wanted to share it. Weeks turned into months, and my little support group grew into something bigger. A local newspaper wrote about the second sunrise. Then a radio host invited me to share my story on air. "I'm not special," I told her during the interview. "I'm just proof that broken things can still be beautiful." After that, letters started arriving from women all across the country. They wrote about betrayal, divorce, loss, fear, but also about hope. One woman said, "Hearing your story made me walk out of a marriage that was killing my spirit." Another wrote, "You reminded me I'm not too old to begin again." Each letter felt like a seed, a piece of courage planted in the soil of someone else's pain. One evening, Raymond and I were closing up after another meeting at the community hall. The air was heavy with summer heat, but the laughter still lingered. He turned to me, wiping sweat from his brow. "You've built something real here, Clara, something that's gonna outlive us both." I smiled softly. I didn't build it alone. Every woman who walked through that door carried a piece of it. He looked at me for a long moment. Then, almost shyly, he reached into his pocket and handed me a small box. Inside was a silver necklace with a tiny sunflower charm. "For when you forget how bright you are," he said. I didn't know whether to cry or laugh, so I did both. That night, I sat on the porch, the necklace warm against my skin, and thought about the woman I used to be. The one who cried in her lawyer's office, who signed divorce papers with shaking hands, who thought her life had ended. I wanted to reach back in time and tell her, "Honey, you're not losing yourself. You're shedding what no longer fits." Raymond and I never rushed anything. We took our time. Some evenings we'd cook together or dance to old soul music under the porch lights. Other nights we'd sit in silence, just listening to the crickets sing. He gave me space to be myself, every scar, every laugh line, every lesson. And for the first time, love felt like peace, not survival. One morning, as I prepared for another community event, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My hair had silver strands now, my skin carried stories, and my eyes, they were no longer tired. They were alive. I whispered to myself, "You did it, Clara. You really did it." Sometimes the greatest love story isn't about who you end up with. It's about who you become when you finally learn to love yourself. The first line I wrote in my journal that autumn was simple. I survived myself. It felt like a confession and a celebration all at once. After years of pain, healing, laughter, and growth, I realized something profound. My story didn't belong just to me anymore. It belonged to every woman who ever stayed too long, cried too hard, or believed she wasn't enough. So I started writing. Not a diary, but a book, a memoir about love, loss, and what it truly means to forgive. Each morning, I sat by the window of my little house in Savannah, a cup of coffee steaming beside me, the ocean whispering in the distance. The pages filled slowly, like the tide, sometimes soft and gentle, sometimes fierce and raw. I wrote about Marcus, not to shame him, but to understand him. I wrote about the years I lost trying to make a broken marriage whole. And I wrote about the day I finally let go, the day I chose me. Forgiveness wasn't easy. It wasn't quick, but it was necessary. Because anger keeps you tied to the past. Forgiveness, it sets you free. Months later, when my book, The Bloom After the Storm, was published, I didn't expect it to matter much. I thought maybe a few friends, a few women from the support group would read it. But then something unexpected happened. It spread from one woman to another, from small towns to cities, from book clubs to radio shows. Emails flooded in. People called it healing in pages. One evening, my publisher called and said, "Clara, your book just made the bestseller list." I laughed, not the kind of laugh that hides pain, but the kind that comes from freedom. I thought about the woman I once was, sitting in a quiet kitchen, crying over a signed divorce paper, and I smiled. A few weeks later, I received a letter. The handwriting was familiar. The name on the envelope made my heart skip. Marcus. It read, "Clara, I read your book. I didn't deserve your forgiveness, but thank you for giving it anyway. I see now what I couldn't then. You were the best part of my life. I wish you peace." I sat in silence for a long time. Then I whispered, "You have it, Marcus. You always did." Time passed. My days were full now. Laughter, teaching, traveling to talk about resilience and second chances. I wasn't searching for love anymore, but it found me anyway. In friendship, in community, in the rhythm of my own heartbeat. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the water, Raymond joined me on the porch. We didn't speak. We just watched the light fade into gold. He reached over and gently held my hand. No words, no promises, just presence. And that was enough. I often get asked how I managed to move on, how I turned betrayal into beauty, pain into power. I always say the same thing. By realizing that healing isn't about forgetting who hurt you, it's about remembering who you are. The last chapter of my book ended with these words. If you're standing in the ashes of what used to be your life, don't be afraid to build again. Because sometimes when everything falls apart, that's when you finally begin. That night, as the moonlight spilled across my porch and the sea hummed its lullaby, I closed my eyes and smiled. I wasn't the same woman who once signed those divorce papers. I wasn't broken. I wasn't bitter. I was reborn. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt completely, beautifully whole.